So in our last video, we talked about recruiting in a candidate-driven marketplace. Since the economy has improved over the last couple of months, continues to improve, especially since its downfall in really 2009 and 2010, things are really starting to ramp up for those candidates that have the right skills that we're looking for. And more and more and more, we're hearing about this, re-engaging this war for talent. But all in all, it's becoming a very candidate-driven market again. And we spent a lot of time talking about that and some basic things that we can do to try to combat what's going on because of the candidate-driven market. But one of the things that we've got to remember is if we do a good job getting them in the front door, we've got to make sure we retain them and they're not walking out the back door just as quickly or faster in many instances than walking in the front door. Employers really need to start understanding what's the motivation, why are candidates leaving, and what are some real basic things that we can apply tomorrow to try to retain more and more of our candidates. In a recent survey that LinkedIn did, somewhere on the Talent Trends site, they looked at what are the primary reasons for candidates leaving. And there was really three. And although they separated them into three very distinct categories, I think they're all really related. And we'll see that as I talk about each of these three. So number one, a lack of advancement opportunities. Employees, after the economy has now improved, they haven't seen any movement. They're still doing the same job maybe that they've done for the last couple of years. And they're really not being talked to or told about additional opportunities or being made aware of additional opportunities. So this lack of advancement opportunities or perceived lack of advancement opportunities tends to be right at the top and why employees ultimately leave a particular employer. One of the other reasons is unsatisfactory leadership management in general. Now, this is a really broad brush, and it's something that's been talked about for years and years and years. There's this saying that the number one reason why employees leave an organization is not the job, they leave the manager. And there's a lot of truth to that. So they're not comfortable with what management is doing, what's going on with management. And we'll take a look at that because it's so broad that everybody's going to have an issue with their boss. But there's some basic things that anybody in a leadership position is going to be able to do to try to better engage those particular candidates. So number one, lack of advancement opportunities. Number two, this feeling of unsatisfactory leadership or management. And number three, lack of challenge within the job. The job has become really mundane. It's the same thing over and over and over. But it goes in with some of these others around lack of advancement opportunity. I'm doing the same job. I feel like I'm caught. I'm never going to be able to move out of that. And as a result of that, I probably don't like my manager too much because he or she is probably the one that's got me in this box and not giving me those opportunities. So again, they're all very intertwined. There's some basic things that anybody in a management capacity, anybody leading an organization can make sure that you've put in place to try to alleviate this group of employees walking out the back door, again, as quickly as you're trying to bring them in the front door. And let's face it, this is not rocket science. So let's go through these three. Number one, be open and direct. This isn't just about yelling and screaming at an employee. In fact, it's not about that at all. But this is about being open about their job performance, open about what's happening with the organization, being very direct about what's expected, about how the company is doing, why the company is doing that. But specifically checking in with an employee to make sure that they're doing their job, they understand what they're supposed to be doing, they understand the metrics around that job. All too often, employers are very ambiguous about what's expected, about when somebody's doing a good job, when they're not doing a good job, and then we wait for the annual review to have a conversation. An annual review there shouldn't be any surprises. There should have been enough open and direct dialogue with that employee so that everything is being addressed, so there's room for opportunity, there's room for improvement by the employee. The other thing is developing this kind of more of a comfortable approach with the employee to make sure that the manager and the employee are very open. Setting aside 10 minutes to sit with an employee that maybe you haven't spent time with, to sit with somebody that you really don't know that well, and not just to talk about performance, but really kind of get to know them. Set aside some time so that they actually feel appreciated. It's something that sometimes we forget about in the business world, that we're so focused on getting the job done or making sure teams get the job done. We forget to spend time with them so that they understand, they feel appreciated. It's the same thing for those of us that have children. Spending a few minutes with our children goes a long way in buying that loyalty back than buying them a car. Yeah, you get an instant jolt in their loyalty when you buy your kid a car, but it's really those moments where you spend a couple of minutes with that particular employee. The reality of it is, employees that really don't get a lot of direction from leadership, they kind of get disengaged. They feel despondent. They don't really feel connected to that organization because there's just not that emotional tie there. And we want to make sure that we do the little things to get there. As employers, as managers, and so forth, we want to consider factors that make people stay in a position and really discuss them openly. What are those things, and it's different for everybody, what are those things that particular employee wants? Is it growth? Is it development? Is it responsibility? Is it compensation? So that brings us to kind of the second category of focus, and that's creating challenge and incentives in all of the roles that we have. And when I say incentive, I'm not talking about throwing bonuses. It's not always about the cash. It could be about advancing somebody's responsibility, giving them a different title, broader based responsibility, deeper based responsibility, some kind of new skill set where it's challenging them in their job. It's giving them an incentive to continue to be engaged. Trusting your employees by really challenging them, giving them a task that maybe is a stretch for them, and watching them be successful, but also if they're not successful, coming alongside them and going through, hey, what did you learn? So that the next time around, they don't feel like, oh my gosh, if I mess this up, I'm done. It's so that they feel that, hey, I can learn from some of these mistakes. We got to be careful that when we assign an employee the same thing day in and day out, over and over and over, to doing the same job, it becomes very mundane. There's a lot of complacency that fits in there. When there's no challenges, where there's no kind of growth and leadership, and there's really no incentive to do anything different or to do anything better, we've got to be careful, and we've got to kind of change up what they do. So even in jobs that are very highly repetitive, putting them on a special project, having them do something different, kind of out of the norm, because you feel they have the capability, goes a long way with continuing to build that loyalty. And we can't forget about actually sitting down with our employees and talking about career progression, both in what you have to offer, as well as what are they looking for. Because in all honesty, sometimes it's best to counsel them out of your organization because you can't offer what they're looking for. While they're there, it still creates this bond. It creates a circumstance that if they leave, they'll refer somebody else in, because you had a real honest dialogue about what they wanted to do as they grow up, so to speak, about how that can benefit your organization. And at some point, if you need a split, great, but you've got kind of a backfill. But what we've got to understand around incentives and challenges, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. As I mentioned earlier, certain things work for certain people. Some people are money motivated. Others, money's great, but it's more about fulfilling a challenge in their day-to-day, moving up the ladder, changing their title, something along those lines. And you've got to make sure you tailor that to the specific individual or group of individuals, so that you're not giving them something or trying to get them to do something regarding by using something that's not important to them in the first place. And then third, and this is a simple one, say a good job. Say good job to that employee that actually executed. Employee recognition, private and public, is probably the simplest way to motivate employees. But because it's the simplest, we often forget. Let's face it, we're all busy. The employees are all busy. But when they're doing that same job over and over and over, and they're doing it well, and nobody comes alongside them to give them a pat on the back to say, hey, great job, thanks for what you've done, they become pretty unappreciated. They feel unappreciated. And potentially over a period of time, that loyalty to the organization decreases, complacency increases, just by saying a good job. Take a few seconds. A 10-second conversation can be had about, hey, look at the great job Sally did, or Susie Q did, or Tom did, or Joe Smith did. No matter what level the individual's in. One of the things that executives often forget is if they have executives working for them, whether they're a VP, a senior VP, an EVP. It really doesn't matter on the level. Everybody needs that pat on the back. Everybody needs to hear, hey, you've done a really good job. So kind of wrapping this all up, statistically, keeping your top performers happy is actually worth it because it doesn't take a ton of energy, it doesn't take a ton of time overall. But if we do these little things to keep our employees engaged, we can often get 50% more productivity statistically than if we don't keep them engaged. Just by saying, great job, by stretching them, by giving them opportunity. We've got to realize, even though we're all talking about this war for talent and trying to get them, we can't have our most profitable talent, those that are really performing well, walk out the door because we're not dealing with them and we're not giving them support. I hope this helps.